So today's presentation is going to be on navigating the college search process. And there are so many different avenues that are packed within this subject, because when you're going through the college search process, it really falls into many different factors. And we're going to talk about those today. But primarily, we're going to talk about kind of three different areas of how do you go about the college search process, keeping in mind finding the right academic school for a student, the right social environment, and the right financial fit, and how that looks into it. And how do you start to decipher amongst the thousands of colleges in the US, let alone the thousands of colleges, globally, that students can be considering? How do you really sift through those to figure out, again, what's going to be a good fit? And where do you go from there? How do you visit campuses? How do you make the most of those experiences? So those are going to be some of the main areas that we're touching upon today in today's presentation. A little bit about us for those that just popped in. Laurel Gross, who's my co-founder, she's not on this evening, and myself, we founded ScholarTrek and the ScholarTrek Foundation. And so we work with families one-on-one, but we also do a lot of work, and that takes up the majority of our time actually, is working with schools directly, and school districts, to put on events to make sure that all students have access to this information, so that they feel empowered going into the college search and application process, or anything within post-secondary planning. So students who don't know what they want to major in, have often tapped on us to just kind of walk through those steps. I will preface, it is always okay to not know what you want to major in. Most students change their major multiple times in college. So just know that there doesn't need to be that pressure. And that's important also going into today's kind of conversation. So when looking at the college search process, I always like to look at it from a high level first, because you don't kind of know if you're doing the right thing if you don't know what's in the perfect world and expectation of you. And so we've really broken this down, for families, because we know there's different, families and students at different grade levels who are tuning in. And so, students during their freshman and sophomore year in particular, that's when you're really starting to build an awareness of colleges and the different types of colleges that are out there, so that when you really get to the nitty-gritty part of the college search, you feel confident, in what that's going to entail and what things might be, again, a good fit for you or seem exciting. Those are the things that we want to make sure freshmen and sophomores are really kind of keen on. Now, when it comes to junior year, it's their third year in high school. So that's when you do want to start really dwindling it down and doing that deeper research and kind of what are those target colleges that you're interested in, figuring out how do I learn more about those schools, whether it is arranging a campus visit, talking to somebody like Caitlin, if they come and visit your school, or go to a college fair, multiple different ways to get in contact with these colleges, so that way, when you're going into your senior year, you feel pretty confident that you have a solid list of colleges that you plan to apply to. Applying to colleges, and Caitlin, I'll have kind of chime in on this, can often feel like you have a whole nother class load, under your belt. And so that's why students often can get a little bit more overwhelmed than we would like them to be, because there is a lot to the application process, not only just the pressure of wanting to get, accepted into a university, and through that admission process, but also just all the essays and other components that go with that. Caitlin, any advice that you have, especially looking at families supporting their students to kind of junior year and senior year to help them through that process?
Yeah, so one thing that I definitely want to point out, Melissa already said it, is undecided is totally okay. So when you're talking to your schools, making sure that you're consistent with that language of what your areas of interest are is going to help that comparison and contrast be a lot more fruitful for you. I frequently go to college fairs and I'll have a student come up to my table and say, hey, I'm interested in art. And then they go to the table next to me and I'm interested in engineering. And then the table next to them and they're interested in nursing. Well, I had engineering and nursing too. And so if you're, hey, I'm undecided, but these are the 5 majors or I'm considering, or hey, I know exactly what I want to study, making sure whatever that language is consistent, so that when you start comparing institutions and you get to that junior year aspect of visiting, you're going to have a lot more targeted of a list for that. Also, college is expensive. We're going to talk about that, I'm sure, this evening, but applying to college is expensive too. And so making sure that you guys whittle that list down by utilizing the resources of talking to admissions counselors, visiting colleges, before we get to August of your senior year or September of your senior year, so that that admissions process is a whole lot easier, and you're not putting out 17 applications only to be accepted to 17 universities. So those would be my advices on that high level aspect.
Absolutely. And if any of you have heard our presentation on financial aid, we often talk about how the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, allows you to put in 10 colleges. And we always use that as that's the subtle hint that your list should ideally be 10 and under. There's always going to be different personal reasons for a list that might need to be bigger than that. But for the most part, that's like a good little cue there. So when you're looking at, kind of what college is going to be a good fit for me, how do I again go and kind of approach the search process? These are going to be the different areas that I feel like often, students and families are going, yeah, what's a reason to consider a college, right? And some of these are going to pull more weight for a student than others, but I cannot emphasize enough that really these should be weighted equally, because we want to make sure that a student is happy and successful at a school. And if their academics, if it's not a good fit in terms of just how they approach the education, or the offerings for that student size wise, that student may not be their best selves, which could impact them financially, but also could impact, kind of their post-college plans, because if their GPA takes a dip because it wasn't a good fit, that's going to impact potentially some of the employers that they may be looking at. So it really is a full cycle experience. So often, students, we always kind of say, is there a location, a setting that you envision seeing yourself, whether it's a certain part of the country, whether you are considering something more urban, something more rural, something suburban, right? And finding that right fit for you. And that same goes for size. Oftentimes students always think they want something bigger than what they've had. Always a bit of a mystery to me myself. I went to a small school and I absolutely loved it. But again, not everybody is Melissa. Not everybody wants a small school. Others thrive on a larger campus. And so students do really kind of need to dig deep down and, even reflect just starting on their high school experience in particular and say, what did I enjoy about my classes? What's been surprising for us is even some students that through COVID, whether it was for a short 2-week period, up to several months of virtual learning, well, some people couldn't wait to get back into the classroom. Others said, that environment actually kind of worked for me. Like that matched my learning style. And that was shocking for a lot of people. So again, it's really just kind of taking that moment to reflect on, again, how do you best learn and making sure that college environment is going to be reflective of that. Now, we know this is kind of the hot topic for everybody. I think many people care about reputation and ranking, but please take that with a grain of salt, right? You want to go to a school that's the right fit for you. And that is going to be in itself the best reputation and ranking that you can have. That is not the end all be all. I could go in for a long time about like US News rankings and how those rankings work and the inner workings of it. I used to work on the college admission side, and I was the one slated to help input that information for those rankings and knew there was strategy behind it. And so, my hope for you, and I'll have Caitlin chime in on this as well, because I know she's passionate about this, is that, those rankings are not everything. They are not indicative of a student's, time in college and what their outcome is going to be. And so Caitlin, I'll let you chime in on that.
Absolutely. Like Melissa said, everything should be taken equally, and I definitely think reputation should be taken equally. First and foremost, we as institutions can come up with a top ranking for just about anything that exists. You want to know what it is like to be student life? Yeah, I got the best student life. I'm top ranked in the country for that. There are rankings for everything, and we are constantly always looking, obviously, for the best rankings in those. And so, yes, rankings matter, but also at the same time, they don't matter, because you may say, I want to go to the number one school in my major, and that number one school in your major may be the complete opposite education style that you need. It may be in a big, huge urban environment, and you're not cut out for that big, huge urban environment. And so that's going to be a clash for you just because it's top ranked. I also think that with all of this is where visiting schools is really important. Melissa mentioned she went to a small school. I went to a big school. I thought I wanted to go to a small school. I toured a small school and was like, nope, this isn't for me. But I thought for my whole entire college career or high school career until I got to that tour that that's what I thought I wanted. And so that's one of those things that just because you think it may be what works for you may not be. So I always encourage students to visit small, big, medium, urban, suburban, rural, and see what works best with you because that can help also in narrowing down those search perimeters.
Absolutely. And then kind of the last area we'll touch upon too is just cost. That is very personal to every family. And it's so easy for families and students to talk to each other about where they're applying and where they're gaining admission to. But most people, and understandably so, don't really openly talk about cost and what that means for their family. And the majority of families, this is a huge area for them. No matter what their kind of income is as a family, is are we prepared to take out loans? What do scholarships look like? And that's an important part of the conversation. And so I cannot stress enough that as you're kind of helping your student through the college search process, to have some transparency in what the expectations are, because there's nothing worse than a student getting to their senior year, they apply to their colleges, they've gotten into hopefully as many colleges as they've applied to, and then from there to find out that none were a proper financial fit. And if that conversation had been had earlier on, it's not something that is of concern to a student. They're only going to apply to the things that they know are a good fit and that they have the support systems around them. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. So there are going to be so many different colleges, as Caitlin and I started to kind of hint off of, that students can be considering. And so here are some of the main categories. There are many other kind of categorical areas that we could go into that colleges fall into. But for the most part, students are looking at whether it's a public university, so something that's through the state system, so like the state university system. So whether you're looking at, University of Central Florida, Florida Atlantic, UF, FSU, right? Or you're looking at your private colleges. So, your Emory universities, right? You're looking at Florida Southern. Then you look at your liberal arts. And so liberal arts can be public or private, depending. The majority are private, but there's a mixture. And so with liberal arts, that's where you traditionally see smaller colleges in terms of their population. They're often at 5,000 students and under. Many average at the 2,000 to 3,000 mark. But more of the liberal arts colleges, their approach to their curriculum, it's more of an interdisciplinary curriculum that a student sees. So while they major in a specific area, they are getting intentional exposure to other forms of academics that is built into their curriculum. And so that's where it can differ a little bit. But there are many larger universities as well who have either colleges of liberal arts or a liberal arts emphasis within their degree programs. Another popular area are HBCUs, so your historically Black colleges and universities. Whether that's something that you're looking at Florida Memorial, you're looking at a Spelman, a Morehouse, a Winston-Salem State University, a plethora of options. And so students who are considering HBCU, there are dozens out there and they are all so different. And so it's important not to lump them together. There's something called the Black Common Application. And so many students kind of think, I'll just apply to 20 of them at one time because it makes it easy to do so. But the likelihood is there's only a handful of those HBCUs, just like all these other colleges, that are a good fit. And so you again, even if you kind of narrowed it down as to a type of university, you still really need to dig deeper into figuring out what's going to be a good fit there. And so, within that, that's when you can get into not only kind of the broad base, but the more specific. So whether it's single gendered colleges and universities. So if you're looking at an Agnes Scott, for example, out in Georgia, is any student who identifies as female, that is their student body, whether it's research universities. And so, Caitlin is a glowing example of a phenomenal research university. If you weren't familiar, you should know that about UAB. To community or technical colleges. And so whether that's looking at something like a Gwinnett Tech, whether it's something like a Valencia College, there's so many different options for students to consider. And I will say that, students who, aren't sure what they want to do, you can go through the transfer process, whether it's, from a 4-year institution or a 2-year, and be supported through that. And I think that sometimes students feel like there's a stigma against that. We want to make sure that students know that it's about the end goal. So sometimes you don't start necessarily at the school that you were intending, but if you put forth that effort, there's that opportunity for you to go through some additional doors, if that's a decision that you choose to make. Another big area, is kind of the geographic region. And I think sometimes students are almost shy to say this. Some are a little outspoken, but some are afraid to just kind of say, well, I really don't like snow. And I'm always like, well, say that. It's okay. I can personally say, Caitlin raised her hand. I used to live and work in Ohio, and I have to tell you, after years of shoveling snow and scraping it off of my windshield, that is not where I wanted to settle down. I knew that. And so I think for students, it's okay to let them know that there are these different factors to consider, and some are going to be a little bit more serious and some may be a little bit more silly. But that's okay. Caitlin, do you want to talk about like some of the benefits of being in Birmingham, for example, for students who are going to UAB, and how that can factor too into, things
Yeah,
that students consider where they're
absolutely.
located?
Yeah, absolutely. So Birmingham is a mid-sized city. So we are actually the second largest city in the state of Alabama. But with our institution being smack dab downtown, that comes with really great, like Melissa said, research opportunities, internship opportunities that are all within walking distance. UAB and Birmingham have incredible partnerships. And so the city and the area around our campus have great partnerships to make sure that our students are getting those needs met so that they're continuing their education outside of their classroom. And that's a really great bonus that you can get in an urban environment, is that you can, walk them out on the street and you're at Shipt, which is huge now, a growing industry with those delivery services that was founded in Birmingham. And so definitely, again, having those perks of a urban institution comes with it. Also, it's warm. You can't get away with it. We get a little bit of snow in Birmingham, but not a ton, just enough to give you a taste as opposed to what you get in Orlando. And so it kind of gives you those full 4 seasons as well without being too terribly far from home.
Perfect. And that's the thing. For students, it's really, what are you trying to get out of your college experience? And we'll touch upon that in a couple slides here. But oftentimes kind of that geographic region, and we're again thinking about, a more urban environment or suburban or rural, really does play a part of that in the college search process. And so kind of leading into that, for those who aren't familiar, as much with these terms, because you're going to hear them over and over again, whether it's meeting with your college counseling team to talk about the college search process and helping you formulate that list, talking to different admission representatives, you're going to hear these terms kind of thrown out all the time, that we're a rural, college or university, we're urban, we're suburban, we have a great college town. Indiana University for me in Bloomington is one of my favorite college towns. I visited that campus, working on kind of the counseling side of the desk, and just absolutely fell in love with Bloomington. And it's not something that even I expected. And I have family from the Midwest. And so, those are things, sometimes students do really love certain aspects, and it's just good to start to become familiar and to point those things out, because it's helpful for whoever is assisting you in your life and figuring out what that college list looks like. If you can start to kind of note these, distinguishing factors to help them identify colleges that again are going to be a good fit. And then there's of course that size factor that we've kind of talked about throughout this conversation. And so for the most part, when colleges are talking about their size, these are the kind of size brackets that they're referring to for the most part when they're saying whether they're small, medium, large. Most don't call themselves an extra large campus, but that's how we like to refer to it, because there's a big difference between 15,000 and 30,000 students. And again, that's where we'll talk about campus tours. But it really is. It's just like Caitlin said, stepping foot on campus and just doing that moment to breathe it in and say, can I see myself here? There's nothing that can replace that. And especially with the size factor. So many students really do not realize what size feels comfortable for them until they step foot on a college campus that reflects that.
Melissa, I'll also say size and location have a lot of factors that go with it. So just because you're like, ooh, I don't like large, just because it was a large school on one campus and it felt different than another doesn't necessarily rule it out. I'm thinking of a campus that's 30,000 and it doesn't feel large because of the space that the institution takes up. It spreads that 30,000 out. And so don't always rule something out always because you're like, oh, extra large or large is too big for me. Whereas at another area in the country, that may feel different to you.
It's a really good point. And they really do. Caitlin and I have had the privilege of both. We've known each other for years, but just stepping foot on different campuses again, there's that culture to it that is hard to sometimes formulate again until you step foot. So that was very good advice. I'm going to steal that one, Caitlin. So in terms of other factors to consider, I want to wrap back around to the conversation of cost. And we're not going to talk about this super in depth, but again, this is just some good questions for you to reflect on, for students to reflect on when they're going through the search process. Just an understanding not only the overall cost, and sometimes we refer to it as the sticker price. What does it say before any form of financial aid, whether it's need-based or merit, is applied? What does that really look like for a student? And for students who know right off the bat, as the majority do, I'd like to be able to bring down that tuition cost as much as possible, really finding out what scholarships are available, being cognizant of their deadlines is really essential. For so many students, they accidentally miss a scholarship deadline. And for some schools, they do kind of automatic considerations. That's not for every school, but there are some. And so if you have a certain GPA, a certain test score, here's a great scholarship. And if you miss that deadline, it can be really disheartening and can take a great university off the table that could have been the best fit on multiple factors. So again, as you're going through the college search process, make sure you are keeping in mind those application deadlines, not only for admission, but for scholarship opportunities as well. And always feel empowered to ask these questions, whether you're talking to an admissions representative, you're visiting the campus, or talking to a financial aid representative while you're in the search kind of area of this, well, what percentage of need is met? How many, whether it's merit scholarships or need-based scholarships are offered? What does that process look like? Are there additional opportunities once a student is enrolled that they can be applying to? And finding out, what the other costs are. And that's always an important part too. Students get really excited about all sorts of different colleges, and we hope that enthusiasm continues, but they're students. And so they don't always sit and go, okay, well, that college is more than an 8-hour drive away, so I might need to be able to fly. Well, what is the cost to fly? What does that look like to get my stuff there? Or do I need to buy new stuff? My goodness, what does that cost? And just really making sure that that is a conversation that is had. There's also cultures for schools, and you can, talk to your tour guides who are most often led by current students, and asking them, how often do students kind of go off campus? What do they do? And that can be a little bit of an indicator as to personal money that might be spent outside of the dining hall, for example, on campus, and how much just kind of, extra money a student may need to have handy that, again, kind of culturally for that school, a student might come across.
Melissa, I'll add to this with us having juniors, sophomores, you guys are starting that process. External scholarships are a huge aspect that you guys can start applying for, especially juniors, and through junior year you can start. So external scholarships are anything that are awarded outside of an institution. And so think like Chick-fil-A's, Coca-Cola, Taco Bell, those sorts of institutions. But the cool thing with external scholarships is they can be applied to any institution pretty much in the country. So you're not applying from an individual school basis. So students definitely making sure that you're applying to as many external scholarships as possible, because those can be stacked and carried to multiple institutions or your final institution in that process.
Yeah, that I really feel like that point can't be emphasized enough, Caitlin, because so many students and families kind of wait till senior year to start looking at that. But if students started earlier, it won't seem as overwhelming. And there really are so many opportunities. And don't just focus on the really big ones. I know it's easy to kind of get glossy eyed and go, oh, $20,000, but the $500 ones are just as valuable. Sometimes we have students and say, if you've had the opportunity to work a part-time job, how many hours would you have to work after taxes to get $500? And oftentimes that's when the light bulb goes off, like, oh, that actually is a lot more money than it seemed like. So again, it's just valuing scholarships of all sizes and being able to look at that. Now there are pros and cons, and we talked about this earlier in terms of reputation and rankings. But I really just want to hit home with Caitlin, what she said, that, every college can find a way to shine in any of these rankings. And it's important to really emphasize, what is that student interested in studying, because maybe that school is top tier for health sciences, but for the student who's wanting to be a sociology major, well, there's going to be a completely different set of colleges that, in the world of sociology, actually have a stronger reputation. They may not show up on the big list, but when it comes to them applying to graduate school or for job placement, they're really going to excel in those areas. And so it's important that when you are looking at more of these national rankings, that these are large, blanketed rankings across multiple programs, not specifically for the area that a student is looking to study in. And so just kind of taking that into effect. And really, again, you being happy in your environment is going to make you the most successful. Caitlin, if you're comfortable, you made the most of your college experience. I feel like in terms of the different opportunities that you took hold of. Do you want to share, if you're comfortable with that, a little bit about kind of your internship experience and all those different things that I feel like just make me go, you absolutely went to the school that's the right fit for you.
I did, absolutely. So I just to give you all background, I double majored in public relations and political science with an honors track before going on for my master's in business administration. I'm a nerd, I get it, it's cool. But talking about reputation and ranking specifically, the PR program that I attended was not top ranked when I started my freshman year, but by the time I finished my senior year, we were #1 in the country. And so just because it wasn't the top ranked at the time I applied, I got to be a part of the foundation of establishing that program as a top ranked school, and it's continued to maintain top rank since my graduation. So it's kind of like, without me, y'all would not have been there. But within that, I also sought out multiple ways to connect from a internship basis and finding those connections that I needed for a job after graduation. So working with my career center and establishing my resume and practicing my interview skills. You won't know it now based on my job, but I was terrified in high school of talking about anything, and in my early years of college about talking about anything. And so getting that practice in of doing an interview that determines like the rest of your life, it's daunting. Getting engaged in different clubs and organizations and finding those connections that were needed. So I think part of it is just finding your niche inside of an institution. You can make college whatever you want it to be, but you have to be bold in that process. And the students that succeed the most are the ones that are like, "Ooh, that looks cool, I'm going to do that," instead of the ones that wait until something lands in their lap.
And I'm going to actually emphasize something that you said, Caitlin. So you talked about how you did an honors track. And I think for so many students, that's something that isn't necessarily discovered early on in their search process. And I wish it was something that was early on, in terms of whether it's an honors track, an honors program, or an honors college, that can really make, students look at a school that maybe they weren't considering, and it really just elevates the experience. Or maybe it was a school that was already on their radar, and they were starting to go, well, what are there some other special opportunities that I can tap into? And
Definitely.
we see so many students who thrive in that.
Absolutely. Honors, like best experience. I would do honors all over again. Absolutely loved my honors college experience. And I think one of the biggest thing is that students don't realize, and obviously lots of schools are different, but the ones that I've affiliated myself with is it's not extra work as opposed to like AP and honors courses. I think a lot of students who are in honors and AP courses all through high school are like, I did that already, I don't want to do that again. And honors college, it's a little more work for sure than your traditional student, but it's in a different capacity. And for a lot of institutions, it's the only way to get honors diplomas. And so if you want that honors distinction on your diploma, you have to participate in the honors college programming to get that distinction. And so that extra distinction is always a good thing to have on a diploma for sure.
Yes. And when we're talking about reputation and rankings, the honors part goes with it because it's only going to make your, your transcript stand out and your application, your resume stand out for a job. So it's always a good thing. There are a plethora of other areas in kind of the vein, especially of academics and social life, that students really should consider in the search process. We've listed some of the top ones here. We could probably go on and on and on. A lot that stick out for students, though, is kind of their housing environment. What percentage and population of students live on campus? Oftentimes, colleges have a requirement that first years live on campus, but some colleges require students to live on campus all 4 years. And that can be extremely desirable for a student, or it can be the opposite. Athletics, that culture, not necessarily even as a student who's looking to play, but also just again in their social life, is it exciting for them to think about going to a big basketball game, a good football game? Or again, if that's just not their MO, that's totally okay. Maybe they want to go to a school that doesn't have such an emphasis on their athletic culture and has a big emphasis on the robotics team, or other areas. And so it is okay to, again, not have everything academic focused on the search process. These factors also play a part in a student thriving and, again, working through that thousands of colleges of what college is going to be the right fit for me.
And again, with those factors, Melissa, those are some of the factors, students, that you need to ask your admissions counselor for a lot of them, but also make sure that when you're on those campus tours that you're asking about those things. If you know like that robotics is really important to you, what does that look like for students? Is there an opportunity to do it outside of being in an engineering program? Is it a club that you can join? What does that look like? So when you're thinking about your social life outside of just academics, asking those questions that you already know that you're passionate about and seeing how can I fit that in without it necessarily being a major. Because I think a lot of students are like, oh, I absolutely love being in chorus, so I'm going to be a music major. Well, that's great. Absolutely. If you want to be in performance when you graduate, but if you want to be in engineering from a career standpoint, but have chorus on the side, that's what ensembles are for. And so asking those questions and phrasing that so that we can provide you the best information as admissions counselors to you.
So the theme of today is talk to your admissions counselor. They're very friendly people that want to help you. So if you take away anything, please know that. So we've been throwing around this term fit all presentation long, but I really want to just kind of draw it home for you all in terms of when we're talking about college fit, what does that mean and how does that, really reflect on you shaping, like we said, a healthy college list. And that's how we'll end the presentation as well as talking about ultimately what does a healthy college list look like. So if you're sitting down, with your student or any other friends or family in your life, and you're trying to figure out this conversation of how do we start that conversation of what they want out of their college experience, these are some really helpful questions that you can ask. And it breaks it down into different areas. And a lot of it is, some bit of self-reflection on a student, but others are a little bit more tangible, when it comes to what do you want to get involved in? Just like Caitlin said, look, depending if, maybe ensemble is the perfect fit for you because yeah, you're not majoring in music, but that is still an important part of your life. I often share a story of, but one of my favorite students, who she was super passionate about swimming, thought she for sure would swim competitively in college. And kind of out of the blue decided, you know what, I want to go to college and just enjoy college. I don't want to swim. And, at that time, we had gotten to know each other. I was still on the college admissions side, but I kind of taken a specific interest in the student and said, let me help you. Like, I want to help you find colleges that are going to be a good fit. And when she showed me her list, not a single school had even like a proper lap pool. I mean, quite frankly, like it was like she could not do club or intramural swim. Like she would be going and it would be the most basic swimming pool that you could find. And there's some college campuses that don't have a pool at all. And I sat down with her and I said, are you sure that I know you don't want to swim necessarily, D1 or D2, but tell me about just kind of your life. Tell me about what makes you excited to get up in the morning. And all of her stories revolved around swimming, not just, the people, of course, but just the dedication she had to put in the routine. And after that conversation, she kind of had that own epiphany moment where she said, maybe I do need to go to a school that at least can kind of support me in this interest if I change my mind. And that's what happened. She actually changed her college list to include several schools that at least had a club or intramural swimming team. And indeed, she did, in fact, after her freshman year, she missed it terribly, tried out with no concern, got on the club team. And she'll tell you, without that, she might have struggled and maybe not even have continued her education or would consider transferring. And that had absolutely nothing to do with her academics, but it wasn't a really important part of her life. And so taking those things into consideration, I think, is really helpful for students. And so when we're talking about the academic fit component, colleges, who especially do holistic admission review, there's multiple components that go into that. But I think it's helpful for students to have at least somewhat of a realistic idea as to where they fall within the academic pool of the colleges that they're considering. And so these are some of the areas that students can start to kind of decipher when looking at whether a school is an academic fit for them. Something as little as the academic majors. And I know that might sound silly, but if a student has a very vested interest in, being a speech pathologist and at this point in time, and they go to a school that cannot support them in becoming a speech pathologist, well, that probably isn't a good academic fit. Now, again, it's okay if they change their major, but we do want to make sure that if at least at this point in time, they are setting themselves up for success. And what does that look like for them? Whether it's a specific speech pathology major, or whether it's a school that has a specific track built out that can help them, again, be able to get to that end goal. And I think that's really important to emphasize is that some students think that there needs to be a specific name to an academic major to make it happen. But for so many career paths, that is just not the case. And I see Caitlin nodding her head. Do you want to add some tidbits on that?
I do. Students, I want to start with, don't argue with your admissions counselor. So if you come up to us and say, hey, I want to go into speech pathology, and I say, great, awesome. We offer a communicative disorders program for you. I'm telling you it's communicative disorders because that's what it's called in the industry. Also, there are multiple ways to do multiple things. There's not a cut and dry path for a lot of programs. So if you come to me and say, I want to be, an entrepreneur and I don't offer an entrepreneur program, well, let's talk about what type of entrepreneurship do you want to do? Do you want to run your own prosthetics company? Great. Let's talk about going into mechanical engineering with a minor in business. That's my job, is to help you see how your programming and academic majors that I offer can fit for you, because X doesn't always equal Y or X, technically.
Yeah. And for the most part, if a school truly is not a good fit for that area, if it's something that there's a very specific certificate, equine studies is a great example. Listen, like if they don't have an equine studies program, it can be very difficult. Colleges are going to be honest with you, because just as much as you're trying to figure out what schools are a good fit for you in your college search process, they too are trying to identify students that are going to thrive on their campus and be, successful with reaching their end goals as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, that support is always there for you. Now, kind of switching over from academic majors, this is when things can get a little bit more on the quantitative side, right? So colleges often report on their middle 50% for their GPAs. Some will do their averages, but the majority are their middle 50%, which I find to be the most helpful because that allows a student to know, looking at their GPA calculation from their high school, where might I fall? Right? Am I in the top 25th percentile? Maybe that's a good indicator that if they have an honors program or an honors college, that's something you should also be considering. If you're on the bottom 25th percentile, it does not mean that it's not a good fit, but it is again helpful to have a realistic expectation when you're building your college list as to the potential chances of you receiving admission to that university at this point in time. Maybe it's a school that you would end up transferring into if that was still your prerogative after starting off at another school. But again, it's just helpful for you to realize not only an academic, but also if there's any merit-based scholarships, for example, if you know that you're kind of towards the bottom 50th percentile, you're probably not going to be a strong contender for a merit-based scholarship. And if that's something that you are depending on, that's just going to be able to help you give a more realistic lens.
I'll just add to that, Melissa. I think a lot of students get frustrated when they ask the question of what is your middle 50 or what's your average GPA. We state that information. And if you're not in that bubble or near that, you get frustrated for us and you walk away. And a lot of times, just because that's the middle 50 or the average, we still admit students that are lower and students that are higher than that. And so I think if you are bottom half of your class, maybe starting and knowing, maybe asking average is not a good course for me. Maybe asking minimum is a better course for me. So look at your own personal GPA. If you're sitting on that 2.930 range and you come to me and say, what's your average? And I say it's a 3.8. Well, you're going, well, man, I don't think I can get into UAB, but that may not be the case because that's not my minimum. And so we can have a different conversation. But if you walk away, I can't finish that conversation with you and let you know that UAB is a place for you.
Absolutely. And then within that same vein, test score requirements right now, I feel like this is the buzz for everyone. And this is a conversation you definitely want to have with each and every college that you're strongly considering to help them kind of understand how they review your application. Of course, in the state of Florida, the state university system requires test scores. And that also goes, of course, into the different scholarship factors that go into Bright Futures. But it's important to ask the different colleges what their test score requirements are. And this isn't, again, not only for you to figure out academic fit, because test scores are not often an indicator of a student's, academic potential, but it can also be an indicator of how they approach their curriculum. Some schools that say they're test blind, meaning it doesn't matter if you took the SAT or ACT and you like your scores, we're not reviewing them. Well, that probably says something about that institution. Perhaps if it's a school that says, we really look beyond test scores. We really care about the classroom discussions and the projects and the essays, the experiential learning opportunities. That's how we do more of our grading. If that's your jam, that's how you kind of learn best. Perhaps it's a good indicator that that's a school that might be a good fit. Same with test optional. Now, do keep in mind there are many state universities whose hands are tied. That it doesn't mean that they wouldn't like to be test optional, but there's different reasons for that. But again, asking that question, asking whether test scores are required for admission versus scholarships, because sometimes they have scholarships that are for students who, that don't have test scores, or they'd at least be considered, but there's others that might be higher that a test score is required. So you want to make sure that you ask those questions so that you don't miss a great opportunity in the review process. And last but not least is just academic rigor. So kind of building off of what Caitlin said in terms of kind of, where you fall within your class and your GPA, and asking college reps and not trying to get deterred, but it is helpful to go, what are you looking for in a student in terms of your academic rigor? And again, that doesn't mean that you have to have that, but it can help you understand whether the majority of students are coming in with honors or AP classes or dual enrollment, for example, and just kind of where that fits in terms of, again, expectations of how your application may be reviewed in the admissions review process. Now, when you're trying to just kind of go out into the world, the crazy world, and doing this research, there's lots of ways that you can do this. Of course, you have an amazing, amazing college counseling team behind you. But again, it's important to do your own independent research because that's only going to help. So whether it's doing your online resources as basic as Google, there's tons of college search sites that you can be looking at, all sorts of books, but directly going to a college's website is always going to be the number one resource, because sometimes information gets copied over from a previous year and you're not seeing the most up-to-date information. So if there's a school that you are genuinely trying to do a deep dive into, make sure you go to that college's website, whether it's to find the contact information for Caitlin at UAB, whether it's trying to sign up for an information session, or again, making sure you have those deadlines correctly. That's going to be key for you going through this. The last and short bit of this college search process, and I think you've heard Caitlin and I talk about this now more times than not, is just the importance of campus visits. And there's different ways to do a campus visit, taking into account that there's time limitations, financial limitations, and what that looks like. But I always kind of state this with families, would you go buy a car without test driving it? College is a bigger investment, not only in terms of financials, but the impact that it has on a student's life. And so I know it's a privilege for families to be able to make multiple college campus visits, but it really is invaluable in helping a student figure out where they're going to be happiest and where they're going to thrive in that setting. Just like Caitlin said, how she thought for sure she was going to go to a small school, and that didn't end up being the case. I thought I was going to be the rebellious person who would not go to a small school like everyone else in my family. And then again, I did love it. And so it's important that, again, a student has their own realization as to where they see themselves. And sometimes there's just a gut feeling. And I know that can be really difficult as a family member when a student just says, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. And you're sitting there going, this is an amazing institution. What do you mean it just doesn't feel right? But those instincts are really powerful. And so give them some weight in the process. And so when you're looking at visiting campuses, you can do that, of course, on campus, but if you're trying to learn as much as possible without having to make that investment initially, which is what many families do, one of the best things, honestly, to come out of COVID-19 when it comes to college admissions are the abundance of virtual opportunities. Caitlin, do you want to talk about some of the virtual opportunities that I know you guys offer and
Yeah.
are offered kind of across many of your colleagues' schools as well?
Yeah, so every institution that I can think of has a virtual tour option. And at UAB, our virtual tour is done by one of our trailblazers, which is current students. So somebody that you would see if you came and visited on campus. But we go in depth. We're going to give you inside the classroom, inside the library, and kind of give you guys different views that you may not get on a standard campus tour as well. In addition to those virtual tours, we have online sessions. So typically hosted in the fall, it gives you the chance to learn about the programming at the institution on a high level. But if you want to get into that intimate level, I host virtual one-on-one meetings. So we can hop on Zoom, hop on a phone call, and you and I can just have a phone conversation about whatever you want to have a conversation about. And we can kind of take that online information session and bring it down to a deeper level for you that's tailored specifically to you. So the best way to make sure that you're getting access to, especially the events and the information sessions, is to join the mailing list for the school. They will send out invitations that you can sign up and you can participate in them. Sometimes they're already posted and they're online, like this will be after this evening. So you kind of can see what those options are. And if you have trouble finding them, that's what me and other admissions counselors are for.
So make sure you take advantage of those opportunities, because truly, I mean, they're endless at this rate. Some schools are allowing you to sit in on a virtual class even if you want, which of course is different than their in-person classes, but it might give you a taste, or even sit with a department head. I mean, colleges have really gone all out to be as accessible as possible. So take advantage of that. That was not necessarily the case even 5 years ago. So if you can take advantage of that, definitely do it. And in terms of on-campus visits, there's different types of on-campus visits. And I think this is important for families to understand in particular, and how to help a student kind of gain, the vision of that college that they were hoping for. And so there are always going to be what we call kind of small group campus tours that are often the ones offered Monday through Friday, or kind of a combination of, they might be offered once or twice a day, sometimes more often. Again, often student-led campus tours. And this is a great way to genuinely get kind of a broad overview of the university. Many students feel comfortable in that setting just because, again, they can kind of be as extroverted or introverted in that setting as they would like to be. If they just want to sit back, that campus tour guide is totally okay with you all just sitting back and hearing the information. If you want to ask 10,000 questions, that campus tour guide is also very happy to answer questions and not be on autopilot when giving you a tour. So I think students feel like they have a little bit more autonomy in those campus visit settings. And then there's going to be different types of open house events. So whether that's something that's strictly for sophomores, juniors, some are strictly for seniors, some are strictly for admitted seniors. So that's a great opportunity to get a little bit more of an in-depth look into the college. Oftentimes you get to hear from different offices and resources on that college's campus, and can learn, again, how they can best support you. They might have a clubs and organizations fair for you to kind of hear about some of the different clubs that are offered, different Greek life that's offered on campus, if that's something that they offer. Again, a little bit more in depth, but it is very large. And so for some students, it's great. For others, it's very overwhelming because they're there amongst hundreds of students. and they just kind of feel like, okay, I don't know how to actually get my specific questions answered. So you have to kind of think about your own student, and go, what setting is going to be the most comfortable for them. I will say that many times families, because of course, time is of the essence, they like to do a lot of college campus tours during the summertime. I will give kind of a little bit of caution on that, in that, yes, it's better than nothing. I don't want anybody to walk away saying don't do a summer campus tour. But it feels very different. And I think Caitlin agrees with me on this one, that, when you don't see all the students just kind of out and about everywhere and kind of, again, getting a good feel for it, sometimes students walk away from a summer campus tour going, man, the campus was pretty, but I don't really know like what the student body was like, because most college campuses are pretty quiet in the summer, even those that offer a limited amount of summer courses. So the best thing that you can do is, if you do have, your fall or your winter breaks, things like that, if you can get connected and go out there, it's really helpful to just kind of see students in action on a college campus versus the summertime.
Melissa, I will add though, if you are and I 100% agree with what you're saying, summer's totally different. Come when we have students on campus. If you are planning on traveling during one of your breaks, spring break, fall break, winter break, early part of winter break, and I'm thinking more the February winter break, not the Christmas winter break. Make sure that you guys book that in advance. As y'all know, everybody in the county or multiple counties have that time off. And so everybody's traveling during that time. So if you're like, yes, we're going to do our college visit during our February break, go ahead and check with the school, see when they're going to post their spring schedules, and make sure you're on the front of the list of getting those reservations in, because there are a limited number of spots for each campus tour that a school can offer you.
It's a very good, important warning there. And then this is a personal plug, and I think Caitlin will appreciate this one, that when colleges come to visit, please go and see them if it's a school that you're interested in learning more. Maybe it's not at the top of your list. But I know students sometimes don't want to get pulled away from class, which we of course always appreciate. But it's important to know that the admission counselors are coming to your school, or they're coming to a college fair, because again, they want to be able to answer those questions for you. Certain colleges do something called demonstrated interest, and that's part of the review process. So not all colleges, but a portion do. And so sometimes when they're reviewing applications, they look at the interactions they've had with a student. Did they get the opportunity to meet that student at their school? Did they meet them at a college fair? Did they join them for coffee? Which is so great. I know for students, sometimes it can feel awkward. But back on my college admission side, those were my favorite days, when I could just have a nice one-on-one chat with a student or their family. It was just a refreshing part of the day, because I could focus my full attention just on you and what you're looking for. Just as Caitlin said, like, hey, pick my brain, pick a time to talk with me. Like, I'm here to help. It's just really important to be aware of when colleges are coming into town and taking advantage of that. And then really my insider tip for you all is, just as Caitlin kind of mentioned earlier, that, visit all the different types of colleges, the large, the small, the suburbs, the rural. If for any reason it's just very hard for you to get away, or have a student who's applying to all their colleges are on like the Pacific Northwest, and you're like, look, we can only go to the Pacific Northwest so many times. If you're in that kind of college search early stage, and you're trying to, again, pin down what type of college might be a good fit in terms of whether it's a geographic setting, size, culture, things like that, we always kind of say you can visit some prototype schools. Right. So if and they're not identical, just as Caitlin said, because it can feel, a large school can feel very different based on their setting. But if you're, trying to, again, figure out if a liberal arts college is right for you, well, maybe there's some liberal arts colleges that you aren't looking at in Florida or in the Southeast. But you want to be able to go and visit Stetson or Rollins, right in your backyard, or Florida Southern, take advantage of that and learn a little bit more about the liberal arts philosophy, and, how does that feel? And if it sticks out to you as something that you would like, that's a great way for you to at least have some kind of indicator that is a type of school that you might want to continue to pursue in the research, in the college search process. And so when you're doing these campus visits, please take notes. It will all start to blend together. If it means just taking out your iPhone and opening up the notes section, every campus visit, a student is going to walk away with something that they at least liked, even if it's not the school for them. And there's also going to be some things that they said, it's not a big deal, but wasn't my favorite. Write those things down, because when you're working with your college counselor in particular, if you can note those things and say, hey, I visited X, Y, or Z colleges, here's what I thought, and especially if it's over the summer and you start your school year up, you've kind of forgotten a lot of it. And they do just really start to blend together, because often families hit 2 or 3 or 4 or more colleges kind of in a condensed few day period. And so it's just helpful. And if you can help your student, remind them like, hey, let's just write some things down that you liked or didn't like. And it can be, again, as serious or silly. If it's something like, well, their dining hall wasn't my favorite. They only had 4 stations, and we visited this college and it had 8 stations plus a Starbucks and a Chick-fil-A and a Chipotle. And you go, okay, great. I know that sounds silly, but again, all those things still do matter, because that's stuck out to your student. And it's, again, talking about kind of their overall happiness as to where they're going to go. And so we're going to end this presentation by just, when you're looking at your college list at the end of this search process, some terms that might come up in your conversations, whether it's amongst your family or, in college counseling and admission counselors as well, is students need to have a healthy list of colleges that they're applying to. So, schools that we like to say are going to be a reach. So you don't have to apply to reach schools, but most students do. And when we talk about reach, these are going to be, I actually like to call them highly rejective colleges versus highly selective. They have more applications of qualified students than they can take. And so pretty much if a college has an acceptance rate of less than 40%, for me, they automatically fall into that reach category, because your student could be absolutely phenomenal. I'm sure they are, but there are many factors that go into the admission review process, and it's nothing personal. And I know it's hard to say that and take that to heart, but truly it's not personal. But we want to make sure that you're not applying to all these super, super highly rejective universities, because again, we want to make sure that students, that at the end of the day, they walk away going, if things don't pan out with any of those schools, I still have a lot of great options. And that's where your target and likely schools are really important. So your target schools, when we were talking about kind of the academic fit in particular, that middle 50% GPA, that middle 50% for their test scores, if you fall within that, that's a really great indicator to be a target school. There's not necessarily a clear reason why you wouldn't receive admission, because you line up academically, but again, nothing is ever guaranteed in this process. And then you have your likely colleges and universities. So these are, perhaps you fall within that upper 25th percentile in terms of their academics. And so that you are a strong academic and social fit for them. But I'm going to emphasize, don't take that for granted. Sometimes students skim over essay prompts for schools that for them fall into a likely category. And then they are really disappointed when they find out they don't receive admission because they didn't put in the full effort to that application. So we really want to emphasize that. And my biggest tip for you all is, when you are looking at your student going through the search process and you're looking at, okay, well, we need to have schools that fall into these 3 categories. The important question to ask a student is, looking at all of these colleges, again, taking into account that you have schools in all 3 areas, if you only got into one, would you be happy? If the answer is no, that school should not be on their list, because there are phenomenal schools that have acceptance rates of 95%. And of course, there are phenomenal schools that have an acceptance rate of 10%. It's making sure that you have found, again, that academic, social, financial fit. And every school has something great to offer a student. We just want to make sure that you're only applying to the schools that do kind of fit the mold for those. Caitlin, you want to add to that?
I will add to that, and not to throw a wrench, but binding versus non-binding. A lot of those reach institutions are going to be binding institutions, meaning if you are admitted, you're going, you guys. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so making sure when you are making those lists, that you're being very cognitive of a binding institution versus a non-binding institution, so that if you are admitted into that binding institution, that's it. your college search process is over and you're going to college at that institution. And so if you don't want a binding institution, take note of that when you're making that. For instance, UAB, we're non-binding. We definitely want you to attend, but we're giving you that option to find the best fit for yourself. And if that's UAB, fantastic. But if it's not, fantastic. And so a lot of institutions are going to look at that also.
And just for those who aren't familiar with the binding term, what Caitlin's referring to is there's different types of application types that you're going to run into. And so whether that's a school that's early decision, and that's a binding decision. So a student, that's their top pick, they are prepared to take on, if that's the school they get into, they are withdrawing all of their applications. They are accepting the unknown financially as well. So a very limited amount of students is early decision the right choice for them, because it really has to be the right fit across the board. And a very limited amount of students are in a position where that's a good choice. Then there's early action. So those are students who are able to apply early on during their senior year, often with deadlines in October and November, oftentimes receiving admission decisions before their winter break, but it's not binding, meaning you still have until May 1st of your senior year to say, yes, 100% that is the school for me. And then you're going to come across many other deadlines, whether it's something called a regular decision deadline, rolling admission deadlines, early decision too, which is also binding, restrictive early action. There's all these fun terms. And so at any point, if you are confused, I mean, that is definitely where you get your community around you, whether it's your college counselor or you specifically asking the admission counselor to ask them, hey, I just want to clarify what your application type means. We want to make sure that at any point, that a family feels empowered to know that. We don't want any, misinformation going about. And so just to conclude the entire presentation, this is your student's journey. People talk, we get it. And it's exciting to talk because this is an exciting time in your student's life. But when they're going through the search process, it's just important to put your student at the forefront. And as long as you focus on what is best for them, not compared to their best friend, to your best friend, it's going to be a fantastic process and opportunity. And so if you do that, you're going to be in a great position. Your student is going to thrive. And you're going to walk away going, oh my gosh, the college search and application process was so much fun. So just make sure that your student is always the center of attention in the college search process, and you'll be doing just great. With that, we will open the floor for any questions. I know because we started late, we're a little over time. So Caitlin, if at any point you need to jump off, you just say, I need to jump off. But if any of you have questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself or put them in the chat box. And Caitlin or myself would be more than happy to answer them for you.